Sewer, London, the 14th of May, 1818. 3 hours before an important Mayfair ball, Lucy Catesby watched the gown meant for her disappear into her half-sister's room. Irene's maid carried it with both arms, careful not to crush the pearl-blue silk, and for one absurd instant, Lucy thought there had been some mistake. She had stood for the fitting 8 days earlier. She had felt the modiste's pins at her waist, heard the rustle of that very skirt, and endured Gwendolen's cool reminder that one fashionable gown would have to serve for half the season. Yet there it went through Irene's door, the colour bright against the maid's black sleeves. Lucy stepped into the corridor. "Mary, where are you taking that?" The maid stopped. Her face changed before her feet did. "Lady Catesby said Miss Irene is to wear it tonight." Lucy said nothing. Mary lowered her eyes and slipped inside. The door closed softly, which somehow made the insult worse. Lucy returned to her own bedchamber and found a long dress box waiting across the coverlet. She opened it. Grey muslin. Her grey muslin. The gown had been respectable 2 seasons ago and merely tired last year. Now the fabric had faded unevenly along the shoulders. The hem had been turned and stitched again, and 2 old tears near the skirt had been patched so carefully that the repairs would be obvious only in good light. A ballroom possessed very good light. You received it, then? Gwendolen Catesby stood in the doorway in a robe of dark green silk, one hand resting against the frame. She had never needed to raise her voice to make a room feel smaller. Lucy touched the sleeve of the grey gown. "I received something. Circumstances changed. 8 days after I was fitted." Gwendolen's expression remained composed. "Irene has more need of the blue. You understand how these things work." Lucy did understand. Irene was 23, pretty, eager, and still regarded as an investment, capable of producing an advantageous match. Lucy was 29, unmarried, and useful in ways that rarely appeared on an invitation card. Since her father's death, usefulness had become the safest place available to her. She kept household lists when Gwendolen misplaced them. She remembered which aunt disliked drafts and which creditor required a polite answer. She did not complain about worn cuffs. She did not ask how much of her father's diminished estate had been spent, giving Irene another season. Quiet women were convenient because everyone eventually mistook silence for consent. Lucy lifted the grey gown from the box. Was this the only alternative? It has been brushed, rehemmed, and made perfectly sufficient. Sufficient. The word landed with the neatness of a pin. For me. "Do not be childish, Lucy." Gwendolen entered the room and closed the door behind her. "You know perfectly well why tonight matters. His Grace will be there, along with half the people whose opinion matters in London. Irene needs every advantage." Lucy looked at her. "And I need none." At your age, one should know the difference between need and vanity. The cruelty was elegant enough to pass for advice. That was Gwendolen's particular talent. She could make an injury sound like instruction, and leave the wounded person ashamed of bleeding. Lucy folded the gown over her arm. "Then I am to stay upstairs." Gwendolen's eyes flicked toward the garment. "I did not say that. You did not have to." For the first time, a small line appeared beside Gwendolen's mouth. "If you choose to attend, do not make yourself conspicuous. Irene deserves a fair evening. She should not have to spend it answering questions because you have decided to look tragic." Lucy almost laughed, not because anything was amusing, but because the alternative was to ask why a woman could take another woman's dress and still accuse the dispossessed one of creating a scene. Instead, she said, "I shall try not to inconvenience the room." See that you do." When Gwendolen left, Lucy remained still until the sound of her steps disappeared along the corridor. Only then did she sit. The grey gown lay across her knees. She had worn it once to a winter supper where no one remembered speaking to her. Another time to a musicale during which she had stood behind a pillar and listened to Albert Tyndale, Duke of Erlingham, disagree with a committee chairman in a voice so calm that the older man had apologized before he seemed to realize he was doing it. She had met Albert properly 3 times since then, always at charitable subscription meetings, always with chaperones nearby. He had asked what she thought of a proposed distribution scheme, not whether she approved. What she thought. The distinction had stayed with her longer than it ought to have. Lucy closed her eyes briefly. She would not build hope out of 3 civil conversations, nor would she hide because Gwendolen preferred Irene to be the only Catesby daughter visible beneath chandeliers. She rose and carried the grey gown to the dressing table. Her sewing case sat beside the mirror. When she opened it, a small square of pearl blue silk slid from between 2 folded papers. Lucy stopped. The fitting swatch. The modiste had given it to her on the 6th of May, wrapped in plain paper with the date and fitting notation written in a professional hand. Lucy unfolded the wrapper. The silk caught the afternoon light. For Miss Lucy Catesby, the notation read, there was no ambiguity in the name, no accident in memory. She touched the swatch once, then placed it back inside the wrapper and returned it to the sewing case. Whatever explanation Gwendolen eventually offered, Lucy would not permit herself to be told that she had imagined being measured for the gown Irene was about to wear. The thought steadied her. She called for warm water, dressed without haste, and allowed the maid to arrange her hair simply. The grey gown fit because Lucy herself had altered it the previous year. It did not flatter. It did not disguise its age. Under candlelight, every repaired place would show. Lucy studied her reflection. She looked neither tragic nor ridiculous. She looked like a woman wearing what had been left to her. On the corner of the dressing table stood a small leather jewel case. She opened it. Inside rested her mother's garnet brooch, a dark red stone held in a modest gold knot. Lucy owned finer things only in memory. This was small enough to have escaped every practical discussion about what should be sold, reset, or handed down. Her mother had worn it on ordinary days. That had always mattered to Lucy more than brilliance. She fastened it at the center of the grey bodice. The garnet changed nothing about the gown. That was precisely why she chose it. Someone else had chosen what she must wear tonight. The brooch was hers to choose. Downstairs, carriage wheels sounded against the street. Irene's laughter drifted from the hall. Nervous, Lucy took her gloves and reticule. She hesitated only once, with her hand on the bedchamber door. Staying upstairs would be easier. It would also make Gwendolen's decision complete. Lucy opened the door. At the ball, the house blazed with candles, polished mirrors, jeweled hair, dark coats, and silk in every expensive shade London could provide. Lucy followed Gwendolen and Irene up the staircase with measured steps. No one spoke to her at first. Then someone noticed the patches. A whisper moved sideways through the people gathered near the landing. Lucy kept her chin level. At the head of the stairs she looked down into the ballroom, and there beneath the chandeliers stood Irene in pearl blue silk, turning slowly as 2 young ladies admired the fall of the skirt that had been fitted to Lucy's body 8 days before. For one sharp second, every hidden intention became visible. Lucy touched the garnet at her bodice, not for courage, but to remind herself of the choice no one had made for her. Then the first whisper reached the final stair. Sewer. The whisper reached Lucy before she had taken 3 steps into the ballroom. Surely Lady Catesby did not bring her dressed like that. Another voice answered too softly for politeness and too loudly for kindness. Perhaps Miss Catesby wished to be noticed. Lucy kept walking. The chandeliers multiplied themselves in the tall mirrors until there seemed to be nowhere in the room untouched by light. Every patch on the grey muslin felt suddenly precise beneath it. Irene stood near a bank of white flowers, pearl blue silk, falling from her waist in the graceful lines Lucy remembered from the fitting room. She was laughing at something a young viscount had said, though her eyes kept moving toward the staircase. When she saw Lucy, the laughter faltered. Gwendolen noticed too. She crossed the floor with measured elegance and reached Lucy before any well-meaning acquaintance could do so. "You have already attracted attention," she murmured. "I warned you." Lucy looked at her stepmother. "I have only entered the room." "Exactly." Gwendolen's smile remained composed for anyone watching. "If someone asks, I shall say you were offered every reasonable alternative and preferred this. I will not have Irene's evening ruined because you chose melodrama." Lucy felt the words more sharply than she wished, not because she believed them, but because she understood how easily others might. Gwendolen did not need to invent an outrageous lie. She only needed to give people an explanation that excused their contempt. Lucy lowered her voice. "You may say whatever eases your conscience." Gwendolen's smile disappeared for half a heartbeat. "Do not be impertinent. Then do not call obedience vanity and humiliation choice." Lucy moved away before anger could make her less careful. She stopped near the edge of the dancing floor, where a line of chairs gave older ladies a clear view of every introduction and every misstep. A matron Lucy knew slightly looked at the grey gown and then looked away too quickly. Another woman offered a sympathetic smile that felt worse. Lucy wished, briefly, that she had stayed home. Then she remembered the pearl blue silk disappearing into Irene's room, and knew that absence would have been exactly what Gwendolen intended. Across the ballroom, Albert Tyndale had just finished speaking with an elderly marquess when Lady Catesby's voice reached him. He had not meant to listen. A duke spent much of his life being spoken around rather than spoken to. And he had learned that the most revealing sentences were often the ones people assumed he would ignore. Lucy was offered something perfectly suitable. Gwendolen was telling Lady Marcham. "She has always had a rather theatrical streak when she believes herself overlooked. I fear she preferred appearing unfortunate." Albert's gaze moved across the room. He found Lucy almost immediately. The grey gown was older than anything worn by the women around her. Even at a distance, he could see the careful repairs. What interested him more was her face. There was no triumph there, no performance. She stood with the stillness of someone enduring attention she had not sought. Then memory surfaced. 3 weeks earlier, at a charitable subscription meeting, Lucy had listened while 2 gentlemen argued over whether a distribution supper should be postponed. During the tea that followed, she had mentioned, almost apologetically, that she would need to leave before the end because a modiste was expected at Catesby House regarding a blue evening gown. Albert remembered because she had smiled when she said blue was more forgiving than white under candlelight. A trivial remark, yet he remembered it. His eyes shifted to Irene. Pearl blue silk. Lady Catesby was still speaking. Albert stopped hearing her. He did not know enough to accuse anyone. He knew only that Lucy had expected a blue gown, and that Lady Catesby was now telling the room she had deliberately chosen to appear badly dressed. Those two facts did not sit comfortably together. His mother, the Dowager Duchess of Erlingham, followed his gaze from several yards away, one eyebrow lifted. Albert gave the smallest inclination of his head and crossed the ballroom. Conversation did not cease. London society was far too disciplined for anything so obvious. It merely changed shape around him. People stepped aside, fans slowed. Irene straightened visibly. Gwendolen turned. Lucy did not notice until a shadow touched the edge of her skirt. She looked up. Albert bowed. Miss Catesby. The relief that moved through her was so immediate that she resented it. Your Grace. His eyes rested on her face rather than the dress. I believe the next quadrille has not yet begun. It has not. Then may I ask you to dance? Somewhere behind Lucy, someone drew in a breath. She had the strange impression that every patched seam had suddenly become twice as visible. Albert waited. He did not extend his hand as though the answer were already his. That mattered. Lucy looked toward Gwendolen. Her stepmother's expression was faultlessly pleasant and completely furious. Irene had gone pale beneath the candlelight. Lucy returned her attention to Albert. Yes, Your Grace, you may. Only then did he offer his gloved hand. Lucy placed hers in it. The contact was proper and brief, exactly what the dance required. Yet, her awareness sharpened as though the rest of the ballroom had receded by several feet. Albert led her into position. You have caused some disappointment, Lucy said quietly. His mouth shifted at one corner. Have I? Several people were enjoying my gown. Were they? Not in the way its maker intended. The musicians began. Albert's expression did not change, but something colder entered his eyes before he turned with the first figure. Then, their taste is poorer than their tailors suggest. Lucy almost smiled. The quadrille gave them only fragments of conversation between movements. Each return brought him briefly near, then sent them apart again. On the second figure his gaze dropped, not to the patches, but to the small dark red stone at her bodice. You wore that brooch the first time we met. Lucy missed half a beat. She recovered before anyone else could notice. You remember it? A garnet in a gold knot. His eyes met hers. You were arguing that charitable assistance becomes humiliation when the recipient is denied any say in how it is given. Lucy stared at him. Of all the things she had expected him to remember, that was not one. I was not arguing. You were disagreeing very politely. There is a difference. Yes, I noticed that too. The warmth that rose in Lucy had nothing to do with the crowded room. Gwendolen had spent years teaching her that being unobtrusive was a virtue. Albert had just proved that invisibility and quiet were not the same thing. He had seen her before tonight. That knowledge was dangerous in a way the whispers were not. The final figure began. As they moved past one another, Lucy caught sight of Irene, speaking urgently to Gwendolen. Her stepmother was no longer pretending not to watch. Albert saw the direction of Lucy's glance. You need not tell me anything you do not wish to tell me, he said. Lucy looked back at him. That sounds remarkably unlike London. I have many faults. Curiosity is among them. Impertinence need not be. The dance brought them together for the closing movement. His hand met hers through their gloves, controlled and formal. But Lucy was acutely aware of the breadth of his palm and of how carefully he kept the contact within what the figure required. No possession. No assumption, only attention. When the quadrille ended, Albert did not immediately return her to Gwendolen. He walked with her at the proper distance toward the edge of the floor. His voice dropped enough that no one nearby could easily hear. "Miss Catesby, may I ask you one impertinent question after all?" Lucy looked at him. "You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer." The faintest approval touched his face. "Was this the gown you expected to wear tonight?" Lucy's breath paused. She could have lied for the sake of peace. She could have defended Gwendolen out of habit. Instead, she looked across the ballroom at Irene in pearl blue silk. Then she met Albert's eyes. No, he waited. Lucy touched nothing, explained nothing, and gave him only the truth she was ready to give. "But it is the gown I chose not to hide in." Something in Albert's expression changed. Respect, perhaps, or anger, carefully kept from becoming hers to manage. Before he could answer, Lucy saw Gwendolen lift 2 fingers toward Irene in a subtle signal. Irene immediately excused herself from the gentleman beside her and began moving toward them. Albert followed Lucy's gaze. This time, when he looked back at her, he was no longer merely curious. Irene reached them with a smile so bright it looked painful. "Your Grace, Mamma hoped you might remember that I promised you the second set after supper." Albert turned toward her with the courtesy due a young gentlewoman and no more. "I believe I promised no such thing." Irene's color deepened. "Then I must have misunderstood. That happens easily in crowded rooms." Lucy heard the restraint in his answer. He had seen the signal from Gwendolen, and, although he could not know what it meant, he was no longer receiving the evening as society intended him to receive it. Gwendolen appeared a moment later, carrying composure like armor. "Your Grace, I fear Lucy has kept you from half the room." "Miss Catesby has kept me from no one." Albert's gaze shifted briefly to Lucy, then returned to Gwendolen. "I asked for her company." The correction was mild. It still landed. Gwendolen smiled. "Of course. Lucy has always been fortunate in attracting kindness when she needs it most." Lucy felt the old instinct to smooth the moment for everyone else. She had spent years translating Gwendolen's cruelties into harmless phrases and then pretending not to notice the work it cost her. Tonight she let the silence remain. Albert did too. It was Gwendolen who finally continued. "I only hope she does not misunderstand your generosity. She will not be in London much longer." Lucy looked at her. That was new. Albert's expression did not alter, but his attention sharpened. "No? There is very little reason for her to remain once the season advances. Irene still has prospects to consider. Lucy does not." Gwendolen said it with regret carefully measured for public consumption. "We have relations in the country who may receive her later in the summer. A quieter life will suit her." Lucy's pulse struck once hard. No arrangement of that kind had been mentioned to her. Gwendolen had spoken of reducing expenses, never of sending her away. Albert looked at Lucy rather than at her stepmother. "Is that your intention, Miss Catesby?" The question mattered, because it was a question. "I have made no such plan, Your Grace." Gwendolen laughed softly. "Lucy is sentimental about London. She knows practical matters must eventually decide these things. Practical matters often appear remarkably different depending upon who is allowed to describe them," Albert said. Gwendolen's fan stopped moving. Irene lowered her eyes. Lucy felt something shift beneath the polished surface of the evening. Not rescue, not yet. Recognition. Albert had understood that Gwendolen was speaking of Lucy's future as though Lucy were furniture to be moved when the room changed purpose. He inclined his head to Gwendolen and Irene. "You must forgive me. I have promised my mother a word before supper ends." Then he looked at Lucy. "Miss Catesby, might I ask you to remain nearby for a few minutes?" Lucy hesitated only long enough to make the answer her own. "Yes, Your Grace." He left them and crossed the room toward the Dowager Duchess of Erlingham, a silver-haired woman who had spent the evening observing without appearing to do so. Gwendolen waited until he was beyond hearing. "What have you said to him?" "Very little. Do not be clever. I am trying not to be anything you have not already accused me of being." Irene flinched. Gwendolen's eyes hardened. "You will not use tonight to embarrass this family." Lucy glanced toward the ballroom. Couples were reforming after the set. Candlelight burned above hundreds of faces, each one occupied by its own small hunger for rank, security, admiration, or escape. "I did not choose the dress. I did not ask the Duke to cross the room. I did not announce that I am to be sent away." Her voice remained quiet. "If this evening embarrasses you, perhaps you should consider which parts of it were mine." Before Gwendolen could answer, the Dowager Duchess approached with Albert beside her. "Miss Catesby," she said, "would you walk with us into the blue salon? The doors will remain open. I am told the supper room is intolerably warm, and my son has developed the extraordinary notion that I require air." Albert's mouth nearly curved. Lucy understood the gift beneath the excuse. A private conversation, but not an improper one. A chaperone present. Open doors. No rumor could honestly call it clandestine. "Of course, Your Grace." The Dowager Duchess looked at Gwendolen. "Lady Catesby, I shall return Miss Catesby to you directly." It was not a request. Gwendolen curtsied, naturally. The blue salon stood only a few rooms from the ballroom, quieter but still within sight of passing servants and guests. The Dowager Duchess seated herself near the open doors with a cup of tea she had somehow acquired on the way. Albert remained standing until Lucy sat. Then he took the chair opposite her, leaving a proper distance between them. The clock on the mantel showed midnight. Lucy noticed because everything about the moment seemed unnaturally precise. The candle flame, the faint music from the ballroom, Albert's hands resting still upon his knees. "I owe you honesty," he said. "That is a serious opening. I am attempting not to waste it." His gaze held hers. "I noticed you before tonight." Lucy's fingers tightened once around her closed fan. "You remembered my brooch, and your opinions, and the way you ask questions that make pompous men regret answering too quickly." The Dowager Duchess made a small sound into her teacup that might have been amusement. Albert did not look away from Lucy. "Tonight matters, because I saw what was done in that room. But it is not the first reason I am sitting here." Lucy's heartbeat slowed instead of quickening, perhaps because the words were too consequential for ordinary nerves. "What are you saying?" "That I admire your judgment, your restraint, your courage," he paused, "and that when Lady Catesby spoke of removing you from London as though your wishes were a minor inconvenience, I discovered I objected far more strongly than good manners permit." Lucy almost smiled. "Your Grace objection is not always a foundation for matrimony. No." His expression changed, becoming less ducal and more simply human. "But perhaps respect can be." The room seemed suddenly very quiet. Albert stood, then stopped himself before coming closer. That restraint touched Lucy more than movement would have. "Miss Catesby, I know the speed of this may seem unreasonable. It may be unreasonable. But I would rather risk your refusal than pretend tonight has left me unchanged." He drew one breath. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Lucy had imagined, in younger years, that a proposal from a man one cared for would feel like being lifted out of uncertainty. This did not. It felt like standing at the edge of something immense, with her own feet still firmly beneath her. Albert had offered what women in her position were taught never to refuse: rank, security, a household beyond Gwendolen's reach, protection from every whisper in the ballroom. For one dangerous instant, yes rose inside her, simply because it would solve so much. That was precisely why she could not say it. "Your Grace," she began. His face remained composed, but she saw the tension beneath it. "Albert," he said softly, then glanced toward his mother. "If you prefer." Lucy looked at him. "You may sincerely wish to save me tonight." His jaw tightened. "I do. That is what frightens me." Surprise entered his expression. "Why?" "Because tonight has been cruel, and cruelty can make rescue resemble love." She folded her hands to keep them steady. "I will not build a lifetime on a feeling neither of us has had time to understand." Albert was silent. Lucy forced herself to continue. "If you ask me because I am wearing a patched gown and my stepmother wants me gone, then you are asking the wrong woman for the right reason." The Dowager Duchess lowered her cup very quietly. Albert's eyes never left Lucy's face. "And if I ask again, then ask because you know me, not because I pity you. No, not because I am angry with Lady Catesby. No, not because my title can solve your circumstances." Lucy's breath softened, especially not for that. A long moment passed. Then Albert nodded. No wounded pride, no argument, no reminder of what she was refusing. Very well. Lucy had prepared herself for disappointment from him. His acceptance unsettled her more deeply. "You are not angry. I am disappointed." The honesty made her look at him sharply. "But you were entitled to say no before I ever asked the question." He rose. This time, when he offered his hand to help her stand, the gesture was formal and nothing more. Lucy placed her gloved fingers in his for the brief moment required. He released them immediately. "Then I shall have to discover whether what I feel survives daylight." Something warm and painful moved through her chest. "And if it does not, then you will have been wise to refuse me." The Dowager Duchess stood, a remarkably sensible answer from a man who proposed marriage before midnight. Albert glanced at the clock. Still before midnight. By minutes. Lucy could not help it. She smiled. Albert saw the smile, and for one suspended instant, the solemnity between them eased. Then music swelled again from the ballroom, calling them back to the room, where nothing had yet changed publicly and everything had changed in private. When Lucy returned beside the Dowager Duchess, Gwendolen watched her face with narrowed attention. Irene looked from Lucy to Albert and seemed to understand only that something had happened. Lucy gave them nothing. She had not accepted the Duke of Erlingham. She was not engaged. No promise bound her to him. Yet, when Albert's gaze found hers once more, across the ballroom, she knew with complete certainty that the evening had not ended where Gwendolen intended it to. By 10 o'clock the next morning, Lucy's grey gown was halfway to being carried out of the house. She found it folded beneath a stack of worn table linen in the arms of a footman descending the back stairs. For one startled second, she thought she was mistaken. Then she saw the repaired hem hanging over his sleeve and the two familiar patches near the skirt. "Stop, please." The young man halted so quickly that the linen shifted. "Miss Catesby?" Lucy came down 2 steps. "Where are you taking that gown?" His discomfort answered before he did. "Lady Catesby ordered the worn things sent to the dealer, miss." "That is not a household cloth." "No, miss. It is mine." The footman glanced toward the passage as though Gwendolen might materialize from the paneling. "I was told it was no longer needed." Lucy looked at the dress that had been made sufficient for her humiliations, and then marked for removal before the morning was properly begun. Gwendolen had taken the blue gown from her. Now she intended to erase the grey one as well. The thought produced less pain than clarity. "Give it to me." The footman obeyed at once. Lucy took the gown over her arms, thanked him, and carried it upstairs herself. Gwendolen was waiting in Lucy's room when she arrived. She stood beside the open wardrobe, examining a pair of gloves as if their condition were the matter requiring attention. "You interfered with an instruction to the servants." Lucy laid the gown across the bed. "I prevented my property from being sold. That old thing is hardly property worth quarrelling over. Then it should cost you nothing to let me keep it." Gwendolen placed the gloves down. Must every ordinary household decision become a declaration of war this morning? Was sending away my gown ordinary? After last night, keeping it would be morbid. Lucy almost admired the neatness of the argument. If she surrendered the dress, she was sensible. If she kept it, she was dramatic. There was no path through Gwendolen's reasoning that did not end with Gwendolen being right. "I will decide what memory I attach to my own clothes. You are behaving as though you suffered some great injustice. I wore what you left me." Gwendolen's mouth tightened, and His Grace noticed. There it was. Not concern, not embarrassment, resentment. Lucy folded the gown carefully, preserving every visible repair, and placed it inside her own trunk. Yes, he did. Do not mistake one dance and a private conversation for permanence. Lucy thought of the blue salon, the clock nearing midnight, and Albert asking a question that could have changed the whole shape of her life. She had told no one what passed there, and she did not intend to begin now. "I have mistaken nothing." Gwendolen studied her. Good, because London is already talking. Lucy looked up. "About the gown? About your performance in it?" "My performance consisted of entering a ballroom. People are saying you contrived to look neglected so that His Grace would feel obliged to distinguish you." Lucy's hands went still on the trunk lid. The lie was elegant because it required no impossible event. Everyone had seen the grey dress. Everyone had seen Albert cross the room. Gwendolen merely supplied a motive and invited society to prefer it. And who began saying that? Do not be tiresome. Gossip has no author. Convenient. Gwendolen turned away. If you possess any sense, you will let the matter die. Lucy opened her sewing case. The pearl blue fitting swatch remained exactly where she had placed it, folded inside its paper wrapper. The modiste's notation was still legible. The 6th May, Miss Lucy Catesby. A small thing, a square of silk. Yet it was one fact Gwendolen could not smooth into a different shape merely by speaking first. Lucy closed the case again. "Perhaps I shall." Gwendolen glanced back suspiciously, but before she could ask what Lucy meant, a servant appeared at the door. "Lady Catesby, His Grace the Duke of Erlingham has called." The silence that followed was almost worth the previous 12 hours. Gwendolen recovered first. "Show His Grace into the morning room." She looked at Lucy. "Change your dress." Lucy looked down at the plain lavender morning gown she already wore. "Why?" "Because he has come to call. Then he will survive seeing me dressed for morning." Gwendolen left without answering. Lucy followed several minutes later, not hurriedly. Albert stood near the fireplace in the morning room, dark coat immaculate, gloves in one hand. He bowed when Lucy entered. "Miss Catesby, Your Grace." Gwendolen occupied the sofa nearest him. Irene sat beside her, pale and beautifully arranged in cream muslin, as though the previous evening had produced no consequence beyond fatigue. Albert waited until Lucy took a chair before sitting again. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all." Gwendolen said immediately. Lucy has had a quiet morning. She tires easily after large gatherings. Albert looked at Lucy. Do you? Lucy met his eyes. Not particularly. I thought not. Gwendolen's fan snapped open. His Grace was merely being courteous. Albert turned to her with perfect calm. I was asking Miss Catesby. The fan stopped. Lucy felt the smallest, most inappropriate spark of amusement. Tea arrived. Conversation moved through the usual safe subjects. The weather, a forthcoming musicale, a dinner invitation Irene hoped to receive. Gwendolen answered twice, for Lucy, before Albert began redirecting every question back to her with such deliberate courtesy that even Irene noticed. Then the servant poured tea. Albert looked toward Lucy's cup. No sugar, if I remember correctly. Lucy's gaze lifted. You remember that? You explained at Lady Markham's subscription meeting that sugar made poor tea more noticeable, not less. Irene gave a little laugh. Lucy always has opinions about economical things. Albert did not look at her. Miss Catesby had an opinion about dignity. Lucy felt the room sharpen. He continued, still addressing her. You said that charitable assistance can humiliate the person receiving it if the giver insists upon controlling how it is accepted. The words returned to Lucy with uncomfortable precision. She had said them 3 weeks earlier, while discussing a proposed distribution of blankets. She had believed. Nobody but an elderly clergyman was listening. I said something very like that. I have thought of it since. Gwendolen shifted. Surely charitable committees are rather dull territory for a morning call. Not if the principle is interesting. Albert's eyes remained on Lucy. Help ceases to be generous when it requires surrender. Something quiet passed between them. Lucy had refused his proposal only hours earlier because she would not turn rescue into love. He had listened. More dangerously, he seemed to remember the parts of her that existed outside last night's humiliation. The realization warmed her and unsettled her in equal measure. Gwendolen broke the moment. Lucy is fortunate that your Grace finds her observations memorable. I find good sense memorable wherever I encounter it. Irene's fingers tightened around her saucer. Lucy saw it. So did Gwendolen. Albert stayed another quarter of an hour, never once referring to the proposal. That restraint mattered more than any declaration might have. When he finally rose, he bowed first to Gwendolen, then Irene, and last to Lucy. Miss Catesby, Your Grace. His gaze held hers 1 second longer than convention required, but no more. Then he left. Gwendolen waited until the front door closed. You encouraged that, Lucy stood. By drinking tea without sugar. Do not be absurd. Then tell me what I did. You know perfectly well. Lucy looked from Gwendolen to Irene and understood that the blue gown had not simply been an economy. Whatever Gwendolen had hoped to achieve last night, Albert's attention to Lucy had threatened it. That was why the grey gown had been sent away this morning. That was why gossip had already acquired a convenient explanation. Lucy went upstairs before either woman could stop her. She opened the sewing case once more and took out the pearl blue swatch. The silk lay across her palm like a fragment of the evening she had been denied. She did not yet know who had given the final instruction to transfer the gown, or why the modiste had obeyed so late, or whether Irene had known before putting it on. But someone did know. The woman who had measured Lucy on the 6th of May knew. Lucy folded the swatch back into its wrapper and placed it inside her reticule. By the time she closed the clasp, the next step had become clear. She would return to Bond Street and ask the modiste who had changed the order. Albert might accompany her if he wished. He might not. This part, at least, would begin with Lucy's question. Sure, the modiste's face changed the instant. Lucy laid the pearl blue swatch on the counter. Recognition came first. Fear followed so quickly that Lucy nearly missed it. The shop on Bond Street was warm with late morning light and the muted rustle of silk from the rooms beyond. Lucy's widowed maternal aunt sat several feet away near the window, her presence making the visit entirely respectable. Albert stood beside a display of ribbon samples at a distance, careful enough not to crowd either Lucy or the tradeswoman. He had not presumed upon the journey when Lucy had sent word the previous afternoon that she intended to question the woman who had fitted her gown. Albert had replied by formal note, asking whether his company would be useful. Lucy had considered the request for several minutes before agreeing. Now, she watched the modiste touch one finger to the paper wrapper surrounding the swatch. "You remember it," Lucy said. The woman withdrew her hand. "Yes, Miss Catesby. And the notation? It's mine." Lucy unfolded the wrapper completely. The date, the 6th May, remained clear beside her name. Then I was fitted for the pearl blue evening gown. The modiste glanced toward the shop door. "You were." No triumph came with the confirmation. Lucy had expected relief, perhaps even satisfaction. Instead, something cold settled beneath her ribs. Until that moment, a small corner of her mind had still permitted accident. A confused delivery, a hasty alteration, an instruction misunderstood by a servant. The woman before her had removed that refuge with 2 words. Albert did not speak. Lucy was grateful for it. The modiste seemed nervous enough without a duke questioning her across a fitting table. Lucy folded her hands loosely. "I am not here to injure your business." The woman looked at her sharply. "I know that, miss. Do you?" Lucy kept her voice gentle. "Because you appear as though answering me may cost you something." The modiste glanced again toward the door. This time, Albert followed the movement with his eyes. From the street below came the muffled grind of carriage wheels and the occasional cry of a vendor. Nothing seemed unusual. "Lady Catesby has been a customer for some years," the modiste said at last. "A good household account matters to a shop such as mine. I understand. There are women who can lose one titled client and never feel it. I'm not one of them." Lucy looked down at the blue silk between them. "Then I shall not ask you to risk your livelihood merely to satisfy my anger." Albert's gaze moved to her face. She felt it, though she did not look at him. The modiste exhaled. "You're not angry with me. I do not yet know what you were instructed to do." Lucy paused. "And I know there is a difference between possessing power and surviving beneath it." The woman's expression softened, but her shoulders did not. "You were measured here on the 6th. The gown was cut for you. That much I can say without hesitation." "Was it nearly finished before the ball?" A pause. "Yes." "Was it altered for my sister before delivery?" The modiste's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "Miss Catesby." Albert shifted only slightly, but the woman noticed. Her face became more guarded. He immediately stepped back. "Please do not answer on my account," he said. "I have no wish to make your position more difficult." The modiste stared at him. Perhaps she had expected a duke to sound like a threat, even when he meant to reassure. Albert removed his gloves and held them loosely in one hand, making no move toward the papers or the swatch. "Miss Catesby is asking the questions," he added. "I am here because she permitted me to accompany her." Lucy turned her head. Their eyes met briefly. The sentence was simple, yet after Gwendolen had spent years. Speaking of Lucy's future, as though permission naturally flowed toward her rather than from her, The distinction landed with unexpected force. The modiste looked back at Lucy. There was another instruction after the fitting. Lucy's pulse changed. From whom? The woman hesitated. Before she could answer, footsteps sounded on the stairs below the fitting rooms. A male voice spoke to one of the shop assistants. The modiste went pale. Lady Catesby's servant. Lucy heard Albert inhale quietly. "Is he here for an order?" she asked. "He has been coming most mornings this week. There are accounts being discussed. And if he finds me here, he'll report it." Lucy looked at the swatch, then folded the wrapper over it with deliberate care. "Then he shall have nothing to report except that I visited the woman who fitted me." The modiste leaned nearer. "Miss Cates, please." Lucy stopped. "I cannot show you what you want while one of her servants is downstairs." Lucy said nothing. The woman lowered her voice further. "There is a fitting book. I keep dates, measurements, alterations, special instructions. I must. Too many households change their minds and then blame the dressmaker." Albert remained perfectly still. Lucy felt the first real movement in the mystery since the ball. "Does the book contain an entry concerning my gown?" The modiste's eyes flicked once toward the ceiling, as though even the walls might repeat her. "Come back when I can show it to you without Lady Catesby's servant waiting downstairs." Lucy held her gaze. "You are certain there is something to show?" "I've said as much as I safely can today." Lucy could have pressed. Albert could have ended the uncertainty with one sentence, spoken in the tone men used when they expected tradespeople to obey. Instead, neither of them did. Lucy slid the pearl blue swatch back into its paper wrapper and returned it to her reticule. It had entered the shop in her possession and would leave the same way. "Then I will wait until you choose a safer hour." The modiste looked almost startled. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I intend to return." A faint smile touched the woman's mouth. "I expected you might." Lucy's aunt rose, signaling that the interview had lasted long enough to remain comfortably within propriety. Albert opened the shop door for both women, but did not offer Lucy his arm. On the pavement, the air felt cooler than it had inside. Bond Street moved around them with its ordinary rhythm of carriages, liveried servants, fashionable pedestrians, shop boys carrying parcels, and ladies examining windows as though no private cruelty could possibly exist behind such polished glass. Lucy's aunt paused to speak with her coachman. Albert stood beside Lucy, but did not immediately speak. For several seconds she was grateful for the silence. Then he said, "I am sorry." Lucy looked at him. "For what?" "That part of you still hoped it had been a mistake." Her throat tightened. He had understood too much again. That was foolish. "No." I watched Irene wear it. Hope does not always concern what we know. Sometimes it concerns what we wish another person capable of. Lucy looked away toward the passing carriages. The fitting was real. The gown was made for me. Someone changed the order. Yes, and the modiste is frightened to say who, while my stepmother's servant is near her shop. Albert's jaw hardened. Yes, she heard the anger under the single word and turned back to him. "Do not frighten her further." His expression changed at once. "I will not. You could make her answer." "I could. That is not the same as having the right." "No." He took a breath and something in his face eased. "You have made that distinction rather difficult for me to forget." Lucy remembered the blue salon and the proposal she had refused. She also remembered him, recalling her words over tea the previous morning. It would have been easy to tell herself that such attention meant safety. She knew better than that. Safety built too quickly could become dependence, wearing finer clothes. Yet standing beside him now, with the truth of the fitting confirmed and the rest still hidden, she felt less alone than she wanted to admit. Albert looked at her hands. They were clasped too tightly around the reticule. He did not reach for them. Instead, he lifted his own hand between them, palm upward, leaving a clear space for refusal. "May I?" Lucy looked first at his hand, then at his face. There was no urgency in him, no assumption that comfort once offered must be accepted. The gesture asked exactly what the words had asked, nothing more. Slowly, Lucy placed her hand in his. His fingers closed with gentle restraint. The contact was warmer than she expected, brief, deliberate, and entirely different from the formal touch of the quadrille. There had been rules in the ballroom to explain why his hand held hers. Here there was only choice. Lucy let herself remain for several heartbeats before she withdrew. Albert released her immediately. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For asking." His eyes held hers. "I am learning." Lucy's aunt called her name from beside the carriage. Lucy turned toward her, then glanced back at the shop window. Behind the glass, the modiste had already disappeared from sight. Somewhere inside remained a fitting book that might tell Lucy when her gown ceased to be hers and whose instruction had made it happen. Albert followed her gaze. He left determined that no one should ever again have the power to make Lucy stand beneath chandeliers in clothing chosen to diminish her. It was a generous thought. It was also, though neither of them yet understood it, the beginning of his first serious mistake. By the third morning after the visit to Bond Street, the rumor had acquired details no one present at the ball could possibly have witnessed. Lucy's heard that she had deliberately refused a new gown, then that she had torn the grey one herself. By noon, a caller told Irene that Miss Catesby had appeared in patched muslin because she knew the Duke of Erlingham possessed an inconvenient weakness for unfortunate women. Lucy received each invention with increasing calm. There was a peculiar freedom in discovering that accuracy had never been required. At Erlingham House, Albert found the same stories waiting for him beneath more elegant language. His mother laid 3 calling cards on the table beside her tea. Lady Marcham was delicate. Lady Fenmore was less so. Lady Dacre wanted to know whether you intend to make a habit of rescuing young women from badly managed wardrobes. Albert stood at the window, overlooking the square, one hand behind his back. Miss Catesby did not ask to be rescued. No, the Dowager Duchess watched him. That distinction should trouble you more than it appears to. He turned. It troubles me considerably. Then do not answer the insult by creating a larger one. Albert knew what she meant before she said it. The plan had occupied him since Bond Street. Lucy had been left with an old gown because someone in the Catesby household had decided she required no better. The modiste's fear suggested unpaid accounts or dependence upon Lady Catesby's custom. Money was therefore part of the machinery. Money could also stop it. The Catesby account connected to Lucy can be settled discreetly, he said, through your household rather than mine, if propriety concerns you. 2 gowns can be ordered. Nothing extravagant, nothing that could be mistaken for jewels or courtship gifts. His mother stared at him for several seconds. You have just described 2 gowns bought for an unmarried woman by a man who asked her to marry him less than a week ago. She refused me. That makes the situation more delicate, not less. Albert's jaw tightened. She should not be placed beneath chandeliers again in clothing chosen to diminish her. Agreed. Then I fail to see the objection. The objection is that you are once again deciding what she should be given because you believe your purpose is good." Albert looked away. His mother continued more quietly. "Ask her. If I ask, she will refuse because she will believe accepting places her under obligation. Perhaps." And meanwhile Lady Catesby continues, controlling the household purse. "Perhaps." The repetition irritated him because it left responsibility unresolved. Political life had taught Albert that delay had consequences. If a road required repair, one did not ask the mud whether it preferred stone. If a tenant was being cheated, one did not postpone action, because the guilty party might object. A problem identified became a problem addressed. That instinct had served estates, committees, and men who preferred indecision to risk. Lucy Catesby, however, had begun exposing the weakness hidden inside the strength. "I would not be purchasing her gratitude," he said. "No," his mother replied. "You would be purchasing gowns. That is not the same thing." "I did not say it was." He almost laughed without humor. "You are becoming remarkably unhelpful. I am trying to prevent you from confusing efficiency with wisdom." Albert returned to the table. "The account will be settled only insofar as it concerns clothing ordered for Miss Catesby. 2 replacement gowns, modest, appropriate. They will be sent through your household." The Dowager Duchess did not touch her tea. "You have decided?" "Yes." "Then I hope she forgives you for being generous in precisely the wrong way." Albert met his mother's eyes. "There are worse faults." "There are." Her expression softened, though not enough to reassure him. "That does not make this one harmless." Before the afternoon ended, the instruction had gone through the Dowager Duchess's steward to the Bond Street modiste. The Lucy-related portion of the disputed Catesby account was to be settled, and 2 respectable gowns commissioned without display or extravagance. Albert told himself that he was removing a weapon from Gwendolen Catesby's hand. He did not tell Lucy. 2 days later, he called at Catesby House and discovered that Gwendolen's campaign had sharpened. Lucy was in the morning room with Irene when he entered. No one mentioned the gown directly until Irene, with the uncomfortable bravery of someone repeating another person's sentence, said, "Mama says people believe the whole business might have been avoided if Lucy had not wished to look so poor." Lucy's cup stopped halfway to the saucer. "Does Mama also know what I wished?" Irene flushed. "I didn't mean it that way." "How did you mean it?" "Only that everyone is talking." Albert remained standing until Lucy looked toward him. He saw no appeal for intervention in her face. Remembering Bond Street, he kept silent. Gwendolen entered before Irene could answer. "Your Grace, how fortunate. We were discussing the unfortunate fascination society has developed with one insignificant dress." "I would have thought the fascination rather less significant than the reason for it." Gwendolen smiled. "There need not be a reason beyond household economy." Lucy looked at her steadily. "Then why tell people I chose it?" A fractional pause followed. "Because you chose to wear it, after the blue gown was no longer available to me." Irene lowered her eyes. Albert saw the movement. He filed it away without assuming what it meant. Gwendolen reached for the teapot. "This obsession is exactly what concerns me. Lucy has never enjoyed being overlooked, though she has become rather skilled at pretending otherwise." Lucy's face changed, not with weakness, but weariness. "I am tired of being discussed as though I were a problem someone must solve." The words struck Albert with unpleasant precision. Gwendolen gave a small sigh. "No one called you a problem. You arranged my clothing without asking what I wanted. Now, half of London is deciding why I wore it. Everyone seems very eager to improve Interpret, defend, or correct me. Lucy looked down at her hands. I should like, just once, not to be treated as a project. Albert felt the order he had placed 2 days earlier become suddenly heavy in his mind. His mother's warning returned almost word for word. Ask her. He could still tell Lucy. He could explain that the gowns were not extravagance, not obligation, not an attempt to buy gratitude. He could perhaps stop delivery before they arrived, yet Gwendolen was watching him, and Lucy had already endured enough public discussion of her clothing. To introduce the matter, there would be intolerable. He chose delay. That seems a reasonable request, he said. Lucy looked at him, and the trust in her expression made the decision feel worse rather than better. Gwendolen broke the silence. You see, Your Grace, Lucy has always preferred independence, even when dependence would be more practical. Albert answered without taking his eyes from Lucy. Independence and practicality are not natural enemies. Something softened in Lucy's face. He wished it had not. When he left Catesby House 20 minutes later, he went directly to his carriage with the intention of sending a message to Erlingham House. The order should be stopped. If the modiste had already begun work, the expense would be his, and the garments could remain there. He had one foot on the carriage step when a servant came running from the Catesby door. Your Grace? Albert turned. The man held no message for him. He was carrying a folded account sheet toward the side entrance, apparently delivered while Albert had been inside. Albert thought nothing of it and departed. Upstairs, Gwendolen received the same paper from her housekeeper several minutes later. The statement came from the Bond Street modiste. She read the first lines with annoyance, expecting another demand for payment. Then her expression became still. Beside the charges associated with Lucy Catesby appeared a new notation, settled through the household of Her Grace, the Dowager Duchess of Erlingham. Below it were instructions for 2 replacement gowns. Gwendolen read the entry twice. Then she folded the account very carefully. For the first time since the ball, she smiled. Sewer. The 2 trunks arrived before breakfast, carried into Catesby House by men in Erlingham livery, while Lucy was still fastening the cuffs of her morning gown. She heard the disturbance from the landing and came down to find Gwendolen. Standing in the hall beside the polished boxes, the folded account statement from the previous day in one hand, Irene hovered near the drawing-room door. What are those? Lucy asked. Gwendolen looked at her with an expression almost serene. Why don't you ask His Grace? Lucy's stomach tightened. One of the men bowed. 2 gowns for Miss Catesby, madam, by instruction of Her Grace, the Dowager Duchess of Erlingham's household. Lucy stared at the trunks. She had not ordered gowns. She had not discussed measurements, fabric, cost, or need with the Dowager Duchess. She had discussed none of it with Albert. Take them upstairs, Gwendolen said. No. The word left Lucy before she had time to soften it. Leave them here, please. The servants obeyed. Lucy did not touch the boxes. Who paid for them? Gwendolen unfolded the statement. Perhaps we should discuss that where there is less traffic. She turned toward the morning room. Lucy followed, unwilling to turn the matter into servants' gossip. Irene came too. Gwendolen closed the door, then laid the account on the table. The charges connected with you have been settled through the Dowager Duchess's household. There are also instructions for these replacements. Lucy read the notation once, then again. Erlingham funds. Disbelief came first. The second feeling was sharper. Only 2 days earlier, she had told Albert that she was tired of being treated as a project. He had looked at her as though he understood. "Did you know?" she asked Irene. "No." Irene's answer came too quickly to be useful. Gwendolen folded the paper again. "It hardly matters. You have become very expensive for someone who claims not to seek attention." Lucy looked at her. "I did not ask for any of this. No, you merely arrived in rags, attracted a duke, and allowed him to conclude that you needed clothing. I did not arrive in rags. Society has decided otherwise." Gwendolen's voice remained smooth, and this morning's concert should be interesting. Lucy understood then. "You intend to show that account to people. I intend to correct the impression that this family mistreated you." Irene shifted. "Mama, perhaps we should not." Gwendolen ignored her. "If His Grace wishes to clothe you, Lucy, I cannot prevent it. But I will not permit him to make me appear cruel for failing to provide what he now finds amusing to replace." Lucy's face went cold. "Send the trunks back. Do not be absurd. Unopened. You will need something decent eventually. Send them back." Gwendolen smiled without warmth. After the concert. By 11, 24 guests had gathered for Lady Fenmore's invitation-only morning concert. Lucy attended because absence would have become confession in Gwendolen's hands. She wore a plain day dress already in her possession, and carried no ornament beyond a narrow ribbon at her throat. Albert arrived shortly after the first sonata. The moment he saw her, something in his expression eased. Then he noticed Gwendolen speaking to Lady Fenmore with the folded modiste statement in her hand, and the ease vanished. Lucy saw that change. She also saw recognition. He knew the paper mattered. He knew before she did what it contained. That knowledge hurt. Gwendolen waited until the musicians paused. She did not announce a scandal. She was too skillful for that. She sighed at exactly the right moment and let Lady Fenmore ask whether the troublesome business of Lucy's gown had finally been settled. "More than settled," Gwendolen said. "His Grace has been extraordinarily generous." Heads turned. Albert went still. Gwendolen unfolded the genuine account. "The Erlingham household has paid charges associated with Lucy and commissioned 2 new gowns. After such public concern over what she wore to the ball, I suppose some gesture was inevitable." Lady Fenmore's brows rose. Another woman murmured, "How fortunate." Gwendolen continued, "Naturally, one cannot help wondering whether appearing so unfortunate was the most effective introduction Lucy could have devised." The room changed around Lucy. The old accusation and the new payment joined neatly together. Grey gown. Duke's attention. New clothing. What had been rumor now possessed something that looked like proof. Albert crossed the room. Lady Catesby. His voice was quiet enough that everyone listened harder. Miss Catesby knew nothing of that arrangement. Gwendolen turned toward him. Then there was an arrangement. Albert did not evade it. "Yes, I authorize the payment and the replacement gowns." Lucy heard the admission as though from a greater distance. He looked at her. "Lucy, I meant to tell you before anything was delivered." It was the first time he had used her Christian name before others. Ordinarily, the intimacy might have startled her. Now it only exposed how much had been decided without her. "You ordered clothes for me." "Yes. After I told you I was tired of being treated as a project." Regret entered his face. "Yes." Gwendolen lowered the statement with quiet satisfaction. "Then perhaps the matter is simpler than we feared." Lucy turned to her. "No, it is simpler than you intended." The room fell silent. Albert stood beside her, powerful enough to silence every whisper with a sentence. He did not speak. His restraint was the only mercy available. "I did not request His Grace's payment," Lucy said. "I did not request the gowns. I have not opened the trunks, and I will not keep them." Lady Fenmore shifted uncomfortably. Gwendolen said, "Do not be dramatic." Lucy looked directly at her. "You chose what I would wear to the ball without asking me. His Grace chose what I should wear afterward without asking me." Albert's face tightened. Lucy continued, because stopping would only make the truth easier for everyone else to reshape. "The motives are not the same. The result is." She turned to him. "I will not pass from one household, deciding what I must wear, into another deciding what I ought to wear." Albert absorbed the words without defending himself. "You are right." Gwendolen's fan snapped shut. "Lucy, enough." "No." Lucy's voice remained low. "I have spent years being useful enough to arrange, quiet enough to answer for, and grateful enough to move when told. That is enough." She looked around the room, not seeking allies. "The trunks will be returned unopened. The account was settled without my knowledge. Anyone who wishes to repeat otherwise will be repeating a lie." No one challenged her. Gwendolen's triumph had not vanished, but it had changed shape. She had exposed Albert's mistake. She had not made Lucy complicit in it. Lucy inclined her head to Lady Fenmore. "You will forgive me. I believe I have heard enough music for one morning." Albert took one step after her, then stopped. Lucy noticed. She did not look back. That afternoon, the two trunks left Catesby House exactly as they had arrived, unopened. Lucy watched from the hall until the Erlingham carriage carried them away. Then she went upstairs, packed the grey gown, the pearl blue swatch, her mother's garnet brooch, and the rest of her personal things. Gwendolen found her fastening the final strap. "Where do you imagine you are going?" "To my aunt's house. You cannot simply leave because you were embarrassed." Lucy straightened. "I am leaving because I am no longer willing to live where every decision made for me is called practical. And do you expect the Duke to take responsibility for you now?" "No." Lucy lifted her reticule. "That is the point." Her aunt's carriage arrived before dusk. Lucy left without asking Albert to rescue her and without waiting for Gwendolen's permission. Across Mayfair, the unopened trunks reached Erlingham House. Albert stood alone while the lids remained firmly closed and understood, at last, that every stitch inside them represented a question he had never asked. Albert waited 2 days before asking to see Lucy. The delay was deliberate. Every instinct in him urged immediate action. He wanted to explain the returned trunks, to condemn Gwendolen's manipulation, to put some useful plan between Lucy and the injury he had caused. Instead, he did nothing until he could distinguish apology from another attempt to manage the outcome. On the morning of the 23 May, a footman carried his formal note to the London house of Lucy's maternal aunt. The reply came before noon. Miss Catesby would receive him at 3 o'clock, with her aunt present. Albert read the single sentence twice. Permission was not forgiveness. He knew the difference now. At 3 precisely, he was shown into a modest but elegant parlour overlooking a small rear garden. Lucy's aunt sat near the window with embroidery resting in her lap. Lucy stood beside the mantel in a pale morning gown he had never seen before. It was not one of the garments he had ordered. The knowledge struck him with a shame that was almost physical. He bowed first to her aunt, then to Lucy. "Miss Catesby." Her voice was calm. No warmth, no coldness either. That neutrality was harder to face. Albert had brought nothing. No flowers, no jewels, no package from a fashionable shop disguised as an apology. His empty hands were the first thing Lucy noticed. She motioned toward a chair opposite hers. "Please sit." He did. Her aunt returned to her embroidery, near enough for propriety, and far enough to grant the conversation dignity. Albert looked at Lucy. "I owe you an apology." Lucy folded her hands in her lap. Yes. The answer was so direct that a less disciplined man might have defended himself out of reflex. Albert did not. "I saw clothing used to humiliate you. I decided the solution was to provide better clothing." He paused. That was arrogant. Lucy said nothing. "I told myself I was correcting an injustice. In truth, I repeated the same structure of it. Someone else decided what you would wear because they believed they knew what was best for you. Then I did the same thing with more money and better intentions." Lucy's eyes changed slightly, not softened, focused. Albert continued. "You told me you were tired of being treated as a project. I heard you. Then I acted as though hearing you was enough, even when my behavior proved otherwise. Why did you not tell me before the trunks arrived? Cowardice disguised as timing." Lucy's brows lifted faintly. "That is severe. It is accurate." He looked down once, then back at her. "After you spoke at Catesby House, I intended to stop the order. I delayed because Lady Catesby was present, and I told myself the subject would embarrass you. By the time I left, the arrangement had already advanced farther than I knew. None of that excuses the fact that I created it without asking you." Lucy's fingers loosened. "What happened to the gowns?" "The order has been cancelled. The cost is mine. No debt attaches to you or to Lady Catesby's household." He added before she could ask, "The garments will remain with the vendor or be redirected at my mother's discretion. They will not be sent to you again." "Good. The payment already made toward the disputed account cannot simply be erased. But I have instructed my steward that no further financial action concerning you is to occur without your explicit permission." Lucy studied him. "You have already given instructions." Albert almost smiled at the precision of the challenge. "Instructions limiting myself. That is different." "I hoped so." Silence settled. From the garden came the faint sound of a carriage passing beyond the wall. Lucy looked toward the window, then back at him. "Do you still believe you were helping me?" Albert answered carefully. "I believe I wanted to help you. That was not my question." He let the correction stand. "No, I do not believe I helped you." Something in Lucy's shoulders eased. It was the first visible sign that she might believe the apology existed for her rather than for his own comfort. Most people apologize by explaining how kind their intentions were. "My intentions were kind." Albert's mouth tightened. They were also insufficient. Lucy looked down at her hands. "Gwendolen used your payment because it was real." "I know." She did not need to invent anything. "I know. That made it worse." Yes, he did not add that watching Lucy stand alone before those women had been one of the most humiliating moments of his adult life. His humiliation was irrelevant beside hers. She lifted her gaze. "If we continue investigating the gown, I need conditions." Albert sat straighter. "Name them." "No financial action concerning me without constant greed." "No public declarations on my behalf." "Agreed. I lead any effort to establish what happened with the gown. Not you. Not your mother. Not a solicitor." "Agreed." Lucy watched his face as though expecting the first resistance. He gave her none. "And if those conditions become intolerable to you, you may withdraw." That one struck deeper. From the inquiry, from all of it, her voice remained controlled. "I will not accept cooperation that becomes resentment because you are accustomed to being obeyed." Albert held her gaze. "I do not want to withdraw." "That is not the same as being free to." "Then I accept the freedom." A quiet breath left her. He understood then that the terms were not punishment. They were the shape of trust, as Lucy required it. He had spent his life assuming trust meant confidence in his decisions. Lucy was asking whether he could remain trustworthy when the decision was not his. "There is one more thing," he said. She waited. "You are not obliged to forgive me because I have apologized correctly." Lucy's expression shifted. "Correctly? I have attended enough political negotiations to know men often apologize as though they are presenting a bill for immediate payment." Her mouth almost curved. "And what payment do you expect?" "None." The answer came easily because it was true. "If you decide I am not a man you can trust after this, then I will dislike the outcome and accept it." The near smile disappeared, replaced by something more vulnerable. "That is not what I have decided." Albert did not move. No. Lucy looked toward her aunt. The older woman remained intent upon her embroidery, though Albert suspected she had not missed a single word. Lucy turned back. "I have decided that trust cannot be restored by one conversation." "That seems fair. It must be observed. Also fair." Repeatedly. This time Albert did smile. "You intend a lengthy examination." "Your Grace, you proposed marriage to me after one quadrille." "That was reckless, remarkably. I am beginning to suspect you may never let me forget it." "I have not yet decided." The first warmth entered the room so quietly that Albert almost feared naming it would make it vanish. He did not. Another silence followed. This one felt different. Lucy's hands rested between them, no longer clasped defensively. Albert kept his own on his knees. He would not reach for her. Not after everything they had just said. Lucy looked at his right hand, then at his face. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her own. Albert's breath caught, but he did not move until her fingers touched his. She placed her hand inside his palm, not because he offered it, because she chose to. Albert closed his fingers carefully around hers. The contact was warm and still. No ballroom figure required it. No apology demanded it. They simply sat there, hand in hand, while the clock on the mantel marked several quiet seconds. Lucy tightened her fingers once. Albert felt the small pressure more strongly than he had felt applause in crowded halls. "This does not mean everything is repaired," she said. "I know. It does not mean I have accepted your proposal. I know that too. Good, Lucy." She looked at him at the use of her name. "Thank you." Her thumb shifted lightly against his glove. "Do not make me regret it. I will try not to." "No." Her gaze sharpened. "Do not promise perfection. Promise honesty." Albert absorbed the correction. "Then I promise to tell you when I am tempted to decide for you." "That may happen often." "Almost certainly." Lucy's mouth curved properly this time. She withdrew her hand, and Albert released it at once. The loss of contact felt immediate, but not empty. Something had been given. Not forgiveness, not possession. A beginning. Lucy rose and crossed to a small table where her reticule rested. "The modiste asked me to return when Lady Catesby's servant would not be present." Albert stood. "Has she sent word?" "This morning." Lucy lifted the reticule. The pearl blue fitting swatch remained inside, still wrapped and still hers. "Tomorrow afternoon." "I intend to go back." Albert waited. Lucy looked at him. "You may accompany me." This time he understood the distinction before answering. "If you wish it." "I do." Albert bowed his head once. "Then I will be ready." Lucy's aunt finally looked up from her embroidery. "Excellent. Perhaps this time everyone will remember who is asking the questions." Albert met Lucy's eyes. "I believe I have learned that lesson." Lucy did not say whether she believed him. She did not need to. Tomorrow would give him another chance to prove it. The modiste had closed the rear fitting room before Lucy arrived. and the precaution told her more than any greeting could have done. The front of the Bond Street shop remained open to ordinary customers, but an assistant quietly directed Lucy, her aunt, and Albert through a narrow passage to a private room where bolts of silk stood upright against the walls and afternoon light fell across a broad cutting table. The modiste waited beside it with a calf-bound book already open. "Lady Catesby's servant won't be here today," she said. "I made certain of it." Lucy removed the pearl-blue fitting swatch from her reticule and placed it on the table without surrendering it. "Thank you for sending word." Albert remained several steps behind her. He had kept every promise made in her aunt's parlour. He had arranged the carriage only after Lucy accepted the offer. He had not sent anyone ahead to question the shop. He had not asked his steward to examine the Catesby account. Most importantly, when the modiste opened the fitting book, he did not move closer until Lucy glanced back and said, "You may see it too." Only then did he approach. The modiste turned the book so all three could read the entry, 6th of May. Her finger rested beside Lucy's name, Miss Lucy Catesby, pearl blue silk evening gown, bodice fitted here, skirt length marked. Final adjustment ordered before delivery. Lucy unfolded the swatch beside the page. The silk matched the small fabric notation pinned into the binding. There was no revelation in that. Part of her had known it since the first visit. Still, seeing her own name written in the shop record made the theft of choice feel more deliberate. "And the change?" she asked. The modiste turned several pages forward. 11th of May. The entry was shorter. Her voice became careful as she read. "By instruction of Lady Catesby, pearl blue evening gown previously entered for Miss Lucy Catesby, to be altered for Miss Irene Catesby. Miss Lucy's grey muslin to be brushed, rehemmed, and made sufficient." Albert's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Lucy looked at the final word, sufficient. Gwendolen had used it in Lucy's bedchamber without hesitation. The language had not been invented after the ball. It belonged to the decision itself. Was the instruction brought by her servant? Lucy asked. The written household note was yes. And did the note explain why? No. The modiste hesitated. But Lady Catesby had spoken to me 2 days earlier. Lucy lifted her eyes. What did she say? The woman looked toward Albert, then back to Lucy, that Miss Irene must make the stronger impression. Silence settled over the room. Lucy had expected calculation. She had expected money. The simplicity of the sentence wounded more deeply than either. Irene must make the stronger impression. Therefore, Lucy must make a weaker one. Her humiliation had not been the object. It had been the method. Albert's voice came low and controlled. Did Lady Catesby mention his grace? Lucy glanced at him, and he corrected himself immediately. Did she mention me? The modiste shook her head. Not directly. She said Miss Irene's prospects required attention, and that there was no sense wasting 2 new evening gowns where one would do. Lucy looked at the book again. Were the Catesby accounts already overdue? The modiste's expression tightened with professional discomfort. I don't like discussing a customer's private debts. Nor would I ask you to expose every account. Lucy kept her tone even, only whether financial pressure existed when my gown was reassigned. The woman considered the distinction. Yes, there was pressure. Lady Catesby could not comfortably carry 2 new evening gowns on credit. There were older charges still unsettled. Albert shifted, but Lucy felt, rather than saw him stop himself from asking the obvious next question. He had promised she would lead. She continued, so transferring mine to Irene did 2 things. The modiste nodded slowly. It avoided commissioning another comparable gown for Miss Irene, and it made certain I entered the ball in something less favourable. The woman looked pained. That was the effect. Was it the intention? I can tell you only what Lady Catesby said to me. Miss Irene must make the stronger impression. Lucy absorbed the answer. It was enough. She had no wish to make the modiste invent certainty where none existed. Her aunt, silent until then, spoke from the chair near the window. Did Miss Irene know the gown had first been fitted to Lucy? The modiste closed her lips for a moment. She came for the alteration on the 12th. Lucy looked up sharply. Here? Yes. And was my name still attached to the work? On the fitting entry, yes. I did not show her the book. But she knew the gown had not originally been made for her. She knew it required adjustment because it had been fitted to another woman. The modiste paused. I cannot say what her mother told her beyond that. Lucy nodded. Irene's guilt was now possible, even likely. But she would not convert possibility into proof merely because it would be emotionally convenient. You mentioned alterations that remain visible. The modiste seemed relieved to return to the language of her trade. Yes, your sister is slightly narrower through the shoulder and shorter through the back. The bodice was taken in beneath the lining and the waist seam reset. The work is hidden when worn, but any competent dressmaker could identify that the gown was first constructed to different measurements. Could you identify it as work from this shop? Certainly, and as the same gown entered here for me, with the fitting book and swatch, yes. Lucy rested her fingertips on the paper wrapper. The evidence was becoming coherent, but she felt no triumph. There was the swatch in her possession, the fitting book in the modiste's shop, the pearl blue gown still with Irene at Catesby House. Each object remained where it ought to be, and each carried only part of the truth. Would you say this publicly? Lucy asked. Fear returned to the modiste's face. If I must. Albert spoke for the first time without being invited by name. You will not be compelled. The woman looked at him. Your Grace. Miss Catesby asked whether you would speak, not whether I could make you. Lucy turned toward him. He met her eyes and added, I remember the difference. Something quiet warmed beneath her ribs. Not forgiveness, that had begun already. This was recognition of changed behavior when he had every opportunity to revert. Lucy looked back to the modiste. I do not want your shop made into a battlefield. If public confirmation becomes necessary, I will ask only for facts you can establish from your own records. The woman exhaled. That I can do, and no more, thank you. Lucy folded the swatch back into its wrapper and returned it to her reticule. The fitting book remained open on the table until the modiste herself closed it and carried it to the locked cabinet behind the cutting room. Lucy watched the movement. The book belonged here. She would not remove it merely because possession felt safer than trust. When they stepped back onto Bond Street, the sky had turned pale behind the rooftops, and the afternoon traffic had thickened. Lucy's aunt moved ahead toward the waiting carriage. Albert remained beside Lucy, leaving the familiar courteous space between them. You were right, he said. About what? The questions needed to be yours. Lucy looked toward the carriage rather than at him. You looked as though several answers were trying to escape your mouth. More than several. And yet none did. A heroic accomplishment. She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. Albert's expression softened. He extended no hand. He made no assumption. As Lucy stepped from the shop pavement toward the carriage, she looked at his arm. Then, before he could offer it, She placed her gloved hand lightly upon his sleeve. Albert went still for the smallest fraction of a second. He did not turn the gesture into anything larger. He simply adjusted his pace to hers. Lucy felt the restraint and chose not to withdraw. "There is only one person left who can tell me what Gwendolen meant Irene to understand," she said. "Irene." "Yes." Albert glanced at her hand resting on his arm, then back toward the carriage. "Do you want me there when you ask her?" Lucy considered the question. "I do not know yet." "Then I will wait until you do." She tightened her fingers once against his sleeve. It was a small answer to a larger change. Behind them, the fitting book remained in the modiste's locked cabinet. Inside Lucy's reticule, the pearl blue swatch remained wrapped and intact. Across London, the pearl blue gown still hung in Irene's wardrobe, and for the first time, the truth no longer depended upon what Gwendolen chose to say. Sure, Gwendolen did not raise her voice when she discovered Irene had been asking servants where Lucy was staying. That made the conversation worse. She summoned her daughter to the small morning room at Catesby House, closed the door, and placed the pearl blue gown across the back of a chair where Irene could not avoid seeing it. "You have been making inquiries." Irene stood near the window, hands clasped tightly enough to whiten her knuckles. "Lucy is my sister. Half-sister. That doesn't make her a stranger." Gwendolen's expression remained smooth. "No, it makes her someone who should understand what this family has spent to give you a season." Irene looked at the gown. The silk still held the alterations made for her shoulders and waist. She had known from the first fitting that it had been cut for Lucy. Until now, she had managed to call that knowledge practicality. "The modiste told Lucy about the first fitting," she said. "I know." "How?" "Because people who make gowns also make mistakes." Gwendolen crossed to the writing desk. "I have already reminded the woman that Catesby custom can disappear as quickly as it arrived. She will think carefully before turning private household business into entertainment for patronesses." Irene's face changed. "You threatened her." "I reminded her how commerce works. And if I tell Lucy the truth—" Gwendolen finally looked directly at her. "Then your season ends." Irene said nothing. "Your remaining wardrobe accounts are not paid. There will be no second round of invitations once. Every mother in London learns you helped humiliate your own sister over a duke. You will be called jealous, calculating, and foolish. All three may be accurate, but accuracy is rarely kind." Irene flinched. Gwendolen continued. "And Lucy will have accomplished what she apparently wanted from the beginning. She will have his grace, public sympathy, and a ruined sister to prove how virtuous she is. She never asked for any of this. Neither did you ask to be born into a household where money matters." Gwendolen touched the pearl blue skirt. "Being chosen first is not vanity, Irene. It is security. Women who forget that usually learn it too late." Irene looked at her mother and, for the first time, heard fear beneath the certainty. Not fear for Lucy. Not even entirely fear for herself. Fear of losing position, credit, invitations, and the fragile structure Gwendolen had built out of appearances. Irene had spent years mistaking that fear for wisdom. Across London, Lucy received evidence of the same pressure in a very different form. The modiste's note arrived at her aunt's house shortly after noon. It was brief, carefully phrased, and delivered by an apprentice rather than an ordinary household messenger. Lucy read it twice before handing it to Albert. Lady Catesby had informed the shop that future Catesby custom would be withdrawn if private instructions concerning family garments were repeated outside the fitting room. No accusation, no dramatic threat. Only money applied exactly where it could hurt. Albert finished reading and placed the note on the table beside Lucy rather than keeping it. She is attempting to silence the modiste. Yes, then she should learn what it costs to threaten a tradeswoman under my protection. Lucy looked at him. The old instinct had appeared so quickly that he recognized it almost in the same breath. His jaw tightened. No. Lucy waited. Albert looked toward the window, visibly mastering himself. That was not a question. No. Would you like to try again? Her tone was quiet, but there was enough warmth in it to tell him she was not mocking him. Albert turned back. What do you want me to do? Lucy folded the modiste's note once along its existing crease. Nothing yet. Every part of Albert's posture argued with the answer. Nothing. Not yet. Lady Catesby is using her position to frighten a woman whose business depends upon titled customers. I know. I could prevent it with 3 notes. I know that too. He walked 2 steps toward the fireplace and stopped. My mother could make it clear that Erlingham custom remains with the shop. I could decline Lady Catesby's calls. Others would understand the signal before dinner. Lucy watched him, and what would everyone say tomorrow? He knew the answer, that the Duke punished Lady Catesby for threatening a modiste who confirmed my story. Albert closed his eyes briefly, which would make it appear that I am forcing witnesses into agreement. Exactly. And if the modiste loses business while we wait, then I will ask her what help she wants. Lucy rested her fingers on the note, not what help we think she should want. Albert looked at her sharply, and the irony of the lesson passed between them without either needing to state it. Nothing yet, he repeated. Nothing yet. Very well, Lucy studied him. That cost you something, more than I would like to admit. Why? He gave a humorless breath. Because I know what I can do. He came back toward the chair opposite hers, but did not sit until she motioned for him to. It is difficult to possess enough authority to stop an unpleasant thing and choose not to use it immediately, because waiting feels like weakness, because waiting feels like complicity. The answer surprised her. Albert looked down at his hands. When I was younger, I watched men delay decisions because they feared being blamed for the consequences. Tenants waited. Servants waited. Committees debated while someone else carried the cost. I decided very early that I would never become that kind of man. Lucy listened. So when something is wrong, you act. Yes, even when the person affected has not asked you to. His mouth tightened. Yes, she could have let the admission stand as judgment. Instead, she asked, "What frightens you most about waiting now?" Albert was silent, long enough that she wondered whether he would answer. When he finally did, his voice had lost the controlled certainty society knew. That you will be hurt while I stand beside you doing nothing. Lucy's chest tightened. He continued before she could speak. And perhaps something worse. What? His eyes met hers. That you will look at me and decide whenever I am frightened for someone, I become dangerous to their freedom. The confession was so precise that Lucy felt its truth before she found words for it. This was not the Duke promising protection. It was Albert admitting that his strongest instinct could become a flaw when fear sharpened it. "Do you think that is what I believe?" she asked. "I think you have reason to. You ordered 2 gowns without permission. Yes, and I proposed marriage after 1 quadrille." A faint smile touched her mouth despite herself. "You remain embarrassed by that?" "Profoundly." "Good." His answering smile vanished almost at once. "I cannot promise never to feel the impulse to act before asking you. That would be a lie. Lucy waited. But I can promise to tell you when I feel it, and I can promise to ask before I turn fear into a decision about your life. Something inside her shifted, not because he had become perfectly safe. Perfection would have sounded rehearsed. He had offered something harder: awareness, choice. The possibility that change could survive urgency. Lucy rose. Albert immediately started to stand as well. But she shook her head. He remained where he was. She crossed the small distance between them. His expression changed when he realized she was not walking toward the door. Lucy stopped before him. For one heartbeat, she nearly lost courage. Then she remembered his open hand outside the modiste's shop, his apology without gifts, his silence when she needed to speak for herself, and the restraint he had just chosen when rank offered an easier answer. She stepped into his arms. Albert went completely still. He did not close his hands around her until Lucy rested her cheek against his coat and placed both arms around him. Only then did he embrace her, carefully, fully. Nothing about the gesture claimed more than she had offered. Lucy felt his breath leave slowly above her hair. She had expected comfort. She had not expected the strange relief of discovering that she could lean upon someone without being moved by him. Albert's hand settled lightly between her shoulders. "Lucy, don't apologize for this." His voice softened. "I wasn't going to." She smiled against his coat. "You are learning, under severe supervision." Lucy drew back first. Albert released her at once, though his hands remained suspended for an instant before falling to his sides. Their eyes met. There was more between them now than gratitude, more than admiration, and both of them knew it. Neither named it. Not yet. A knock sounded at the parlor door. Lucy's aunt entered, carrying a small folded note. This came by hand. Lucy recognized Irene's writing before she broke the seal. The message contained only 2 lines. "Lucy, I need to speak with you privately. There are things about the gown Mama does not want me to say. Tell me when I may come." Lucy read it once, then handed it to Albert. He did not reach for action. He looked at her and asked, "What do you want to do?" This time Lucy knew the answer. "I want to hear my sister tell the truth." Sewer. Irene arrived at Lucy's aunt's house the following afternoon without Gwendolen and without a maid. That alone told Lucy the visit had cost her something. Albert was already in the parlor because Lucy had asked him to remain. Her aunt sat near the window with needlework in her lap, present enough for propriety and quiet enough to leave the conversation to Lucy. Irene stopped several feet inside the room. Her gloves were twisted between her hands. "You said you wanted to speak with me," Lucy said. Irene looked first at her, then briefly at Albert. "I didn't know His Grace would be here. I asked him to stay." Irene swallowed and nodded. "Then perhaps it's better." She drew one unsteady breath. "The gown was yours. I knew it when I put it on." Lucy had expected the admission. It still struck with surprising force. "When did you know? Before the ball?" Irene stared at the carpet. "Mama told me it had been fitted to you. She said the household couldn't carry the cost of another evening gown on credit, and that mine mattered more." "Why?" Irene's mouth tightened. "Because I'm younger. Because Mama believes I still have a chance to marry advantageously." Lucy remained still. "That is not the whole reason." Irene looked up. "No, the modiste told me Gwendolen said you had to make the stronger impression." Irene closed her eyes for a moment. She did. "On whom?" The silence stretched. Albert did not rescue Irene from answering. At last she looked toward him. "On you, Your Grace." Albert's expression became completely still. Irene turned back to Lucy. "Mama noticed you speaking with His Grace at the subscription meetings. She noticed he listened when you spoke. Lucy felt the words settle uneasily, and that frightened her. Yes. Irene gave a small, miserable laugh. She said beautiful women are common in London, but women who make powerful men listen are dangerous. She said, if you entered the ball looking as you had at the fitting, people might begin to see you differently. So she decided they should see me as less. Irene's face flushed. Yes, the answer was barely audible. Lucy forced herself to continue. And you agreed to wear the gown? Yes, knowing I would have almost nothing appropriate left. Yes. Why? Irene's eyes brightened, but she did not cry. Because I was afraid of becoming useless. Lucy said nothing. Irene continued. Mama has spent years teaching me that being chosen first is security, the best invitation, the better dress, the first introduction. She made everything feel like a contest I could lose by standing still. Irene looked toward Albert again, then away. When she said you had noticed Lucy, I thought, if I let her have the gown, perhaps I could still become the daughter worth spending money on. Lucy felt pity rise, and refused to let pity become absolution. You heard Gwendolen tell people I deliberately dressed badly. Yes. You knew that was false. Yes, and you said nothing. Irene's shoulders lowered. I was ashamed. Then every day I stayed silent, made speaking harder. That does not make the silence harmless. I know. Irene met Lucy's gaze at last. I'm sorry. Lucy let the apology remain where it belonged. She would not punish Irene merely for the pleasure of seeing her suffer. But neither would she make forgiveness effortless. Why tell me now? Because Mama is still trying to turn it against you. Because she threatened the Modistes' business. Because she told me that if I contradicted her, she would end my season and leave the remaining wardrobe debts unpaid. Irene's mouth twisted. She said society would call me jealous and calculating. Would that be untrue? Irene flinched, then shook her head. Not entirely. The answer earned more from Lucy than excuses would have. There is one thing I need from you, Lucy said. If I ask you to repeat what you have told me in front of others, will you? Fear crossed Irene's face immediately. Lucy waited. Albert remained silent near the mantel. Irene looked at her gloves, then at Lucy. Yes, if your mother is present, yes. If it costs you invitations? Irene hesitated only a second longer. Yes. Lucy nodded. And the pearl blue gown? It is still at Catesby House. Will you bring it when the time comes? I will. The modiste says the alterations from my measurements to yours remain visible inside the bodice. Irene nodded. She adjusted it after I went to the shop. Lucy glanced toward her reticule where the pearl blue swatch remained wrapped and intact, the evidence now aligned without invention. The swatch belonged to Lucy. The fitting book remained with the modiste. The gown remained with Irene until Irene herself chose to bring it. I will not ask you to say anything you cannot personally confirm, Lucy said. You will say what you knew, what your mother told you, and what you did. I understand, and Irene. Her half-sister looked at her. This confession does not restore trust between us. Pain crossed Irene's face, but she nodded. I didn't expect it to. Good. Lucy softened only slightly. It may create the possibility of trust later. That is all I can promise. Irene released a breath that sounded almost like relief. That is more than I deserve. Do not make me decide what you deserve today. Irene gave the faintest nod. She rose. For a moment she seemed about to reach for Lucy, then stopped herself. Tell me when to bring the gown. I will. Irene left with Lucy's aunt accompanying her into the hall. When the door closed, Lucy remained seated. The confession should have felt like victory. Instead, it left her tired. Albert waited until she looked at him. "Are you all right?" Lucy considered lying. No. His face changed, but he did not move toward her. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The answer came faster than she expected. "Stay." Albert stayed. That simple obedience moved her more deeply than a speech might have done. After a moment, he said, "Whether you marry me someday or never allow me near another decision in your life, I need to say something." Lucy looked at him. "That sounds ominous." "Probably." He drew a slow breath. "I will never regret learning from you that care is not possession." Her throat tightened. Albert continued, "I thought protecting someone meant removing the danger before they had to face it. You have shown me that protection can also mean standing beside someone while they choose how to face it." Lucy rose. He remained where he was. She crossed the distance between them and lifted her hand to his face. Albert's breath caught beneath her palm. He did not touch her. He simply held her gaze and allowed the choice to remain hers. "You are becoming very disciplined," she murmured. "I am terrified of ruining the lesson." A quiet smile touched her mouth. His eyes lowered briefly toward her lips, then returned to her eyes. "Lucy, may I kiss you?" Her heartbeat quickened. The question carried more intimacy than any assumption could have done. "Yes." She stepped closer herself. Albert bent toward her slowly. Their mouths met in a gentle, deliberate kiss. It was brief, warm, and entirely awake to consent. No claim followed it. No sudden hunger erased everything that had come before. When they separated, Lucy's hand was still against his cheek. Albert looked almost astonished by the tenderness of what she had freely given. "You asked," she whispered. "I intend to keep doing that." "Good." She lowered her hand, and neither pretended that one kiss had solved the larger conflict. It had done something more valuable. It proved that desire could coexist with choice. A few minutes later, Lucy's aunt returned, holding a note sealed with the Dowager Duchess of Erlingham's crest. Her Grace intended to host a private subscription morning at Erlingham House in 2 days for the benefit of distressed needlewomen and dressmakers. Several women who had heard Gwendolen's version of the ball would be attending. Lucy read the invitation once, then again. Albert watched her, but he did not suggest what should happen. "That is where the truth should be told," Lucy said. "If you choose it," he replied. "I do." That evening, after Albert had gone, Lucy opened the trunk she had brought from Catesby House. The old grey muslin lay folded inside. She lifted it carefully. The faded fabric remained unchanged. The repaired hem was still visible. So were the 2 patches that had drawn whispers beneath the chandeliers. Once, Gwendolen had chosen the gown because she believed it would make Lucy smaller. Lucy spread it across the bed and smoothed one sleeve beneath her fingertips. The next time society saw it, no one would be able to say she had been forced into it. "I shall wear it once more." The long gallery at Erlingham House had been arranged for charity rather than judgment, which was exactly why Lucy chose to speak there. Tables stood beneath the tall windows with subscription books, samples of needlework, and lists of women seeking paid employment rather than alms. The Dowager Duchess had invited a carefully limited company of patronesses, tradeswomen, and families whose opinions carried weight through Mayfair. Nothing in the room announced a confrontation. That made Gwendolen's arrival all the more revealing. She entered beside Irene shortly before noon, saw Lucy standing near the central subscription table, and stopped. Lucy wore the same grey muslin gown she had worn to the ball. The repaired hem remained visible. So did the 2 patches near the skirt. The dress had been cleaned and pressed, but no one had attempted to disguise its age. This time, there was no pearl blue silk being carried away behind her back, no stepmother waiting upstairs with instructions. Lucy had chosen every button, every ribbon, every visible flaw. Her mother's garnet brooch rested at her bodice. Albert stood several yards away beside his mother. He did not cross the room to rescue her. He had asked that morning whether she wanted him near. Lucy had answered yes, but not beside her unless she called him. He had obeyed. Gwendolen recovered first. Lucy. Her gaze travelled over the grey gown. Surely this is unnecessary. No, Lucy said. It is necessary once. A few nearby conversations softened. Gwendolen heard the change and smiled. I had hoped we were finished with theatrical clothing. Lucy did not look away. So had I. Lady Fenmore approached with 2 other women who had attended the morning concert. The Dowager Duchess joined them without ceremony. Her manner remained pleasant enough that no one could pretend she had assembled a tribunal. Miss Catesby wished to correct a matter that has become attached to my subscription morning, she said. As the original gossip was repeated in drawing rooms, I see no harm in facts being repeated in one. Gwendolen's smile tightened. There are no facts left to correct. Lucy wore an old gown. His Grace was generous afterward. Everything else has been exaggerated. Then this should take very little time, Lucy said. She opened her reticule and removed the plain paper wrapper containing the pearl blue swatch. The silk caught the daylight when she unfolded it. This was given to me on the 6th of May, when I was measured for a pearl blue evening gown. Gwendolen's expression did not alter. Fabric samples prove very little. Alone, yes. Lucy looked toward the gallery entrance. The Bond Street modiste entered carrying her own fitting book beneath one arm. She had brought it herself, just as agreed. No servant from Erlingham House had collected it. No clerk had copied its pages. It had remained in her possession until she chose to carry it into the room. She curtsied to the Dowager Duchess and then to Lucy, Miss Catesby. Lucy held out the swatch, but did not surrender it permanently. Will you identify this? The modiste examined the notation on the wrapper. It's the sample from Miss Lucy Catesby's fitting on the 6th of May. She opened her book to the marked page. Pearl blue evening gown. Bodice fitted to Miss Lucy. Skirt length taken. Final adjustments ordered before delivery. Gwendolen gave a quiet sigh. No one disputes that Lucy was fitted first. Households alter plans. Lucy nodded. They do. She looked at the modiste. What does the entry for 11th May say? The woman read directly from the page. By instruction of Lady Catesby, the pearl blue evening gown, previously entered for Miss Lucy Catesby, was to be altered for Miss Irene Catesby. Miss Lucy's grey muslin was to be brushed, re-hemmed, and made sufficient. The last word travelled through the gallery more effectively than any accusation. Lucy heard Lady Fenmore inhale. Gwendolen's composure finally shifted. That was an economical decision. Nothing more. You also told the modiste Irene must make the stronger impression, Lucy said. Gwendolen turned sharply toward the tradeswoman. Did you tell her that? The modiste's hands tightened on the book, but she did not retreat. You told me that yourself, my lady. In confidence, you used my shop record to alter one customer's gown for another. Miss Catesby asked me only what I personally heard. Lucy stepped in before fear could turn the woman defensive. And that is all I asked. She looked toward Irene. Her half-sister stood pale beside the entrance. In her hands she carried the pearl blue gown, folded over her arms. Irene crossed the gallery slowly. Every person there recognized the color. She stopped beside Lucy and placed the gown across the end of the subscription table. The gown was Lucy's, she said. Gwendolen went still. Irene. No, Mama. Her voice shook, but it did not fail. I knew it before the ball. Gwendolen's face hardened. You are upset. I am telling the truth. Irene looked toward the gathered women. Mama told me the gown had been fitted to Lucy. She said our credit could not comfortably carry another comparable evening gown, and that mine mattered more because I had better marriage prospects. Her gaze flicked toward Albert, then returned to the room. She also said His Grace had noticed Lucy at the charitable subscription meetings. She said if Lucy entered the ball properly dressed, she might become the stronger rival. A murmur moved through the gallery. Gwendolen's hand closed around her fan. That is a childish interpretation. Irene shook her head. No, those were your intentions as you explained them to me. I agreed to wear the gown. I knew Lucy would be left with the grey one. I was wrong. The modiste stepped closer to the pearl blue gown. With Irene's permission, she turned back part of the inner bodice lining. These seams show where the gown was taken in through the shoulder and reset through the waist after the original construction. Those changes are consistent with altering the gown from Miss Lucy's measurements to Miss Irene's. Lady Fenmore looked at Gwendolen. Then Miss Catesby did not contrive to appear neglected. Lucy answered before Gwendolen could. No. Gwendolen lifted her chin. She nevertheless chose to attend. Lucy looked down once at the two patches in the grey skirt. Yes, I chose not to hide after the alternative was taken from me. And His Grace later paid your dressmaker. Without my knowledge, Lucy said. I returned the replacement gowns unopened. Conveniently, after everyone had seen his interest. Albert moved then, but not in front of Lucy. He came only as far as the space she had asked him to keep. Lady Catesby is correct about one thing, he said. Every voice in the gallery died. Gwendolen looked almost relieved. Albert's expression remained grave. I did intervene in Miss Catesby's wardrobe without her permission. I saw clothing used to diminish her and decided, arrogantly, that better clothing would correct the injury. I instructed my mother's household to settle charges associated with Miss Catesby and commission 2 replacement gowns. Lucy watched the room absorb the admission. Albert continued. Miss Catesby knew nothing of it. She did not request it. She did not accept it. She returned both trunks unopened. Gwendolen stared at him. Your Grace, surely you don't mean to take blame for generosity. I mean to take responsibility for a decision I had no right to make. His gaze moved briefly to Lucy. Rank does not make an error smaller. It makes its consequences larger. No one spoke. Lucy felt something inside her settle. He could have destroyed Gwendolen with his title. Instead, he had used the moment to expose himself to judgment too. The Dowager Duchess finally addressed the company. There appears to be no remaining reason to repeat the claim that Miss Catesby manufactured her condition at the ball. Lady Fenmore closed her fan. Nah, another patroness murmured agreement. Gwendolen looked around and understood before anyone formally condemned her. Calls would cease. Invitations would thin. Tradespeople who had extended credit because her household appeared secure would reconsider. No proclamation was needed. Society was often cruelest through subtraction. Gwendolen drew herself upright. I will not remain where my family is being made into spectacle. Lucy met her gaze. I did not ask anyone to punish you. I asked only that the lie be corrected. You have your Duke. I suppose that is correction enough. Lucy's voice stayed calm. He is not evidence of my virtue, and you are not evidence of my suffering. What you did is enough on its own. Gwendolen's face changed at that. For the first time, she had no useful answer. She left the gallery alone. Irene remained. By afternoon, the consequences had already begun. 2 patronesses quietly withdrew future calls from Gwendolen. A tradesman sent word that additional Catesby credit would require earlier settlement. Gwendolen announced she would leave London before the season ended. Irene declined the remaining marriage market engagements arranged for her and asked the modiste to take the pearl blue gown for resale or credit toward the outstanding dress account. She also agreed that part of her future allowance would go toward what remained unpaid. Lucy neither praised nor absolved her. Some repairs required more than one truthful day. When the subscription morning ended and the last guests departed, Lucy stood with Albert in a smaller salon adjoining the long gallery. The doors remained open. Her aunt and the Dowager Duchess were visible beyond them, speaking together at a distance. Albert faced Lucy without reaching for her. "You were magnificent," he said. Lucy shook her head. "Do not turn survival into performance." "You are right," he corrected himself immediately. "You were clear and braver than I had any right to expect." "That is better." A faint smile passed between them, then faded. Albert drew a breath. "Lucy, I love you." She went very still. "I loved your courage before I understood it. And I love the woman who has taught me that standing beside someone requires more strength than deciding for her." His voice lowered. "I love you when you disagree with me. I love that you demand more of me than obedience. I love that when I failed you, you required me to become better rather than merely sorry." Lucy's eyes filled, though she smiled. "Albert, you owe me nothing for saying it." "Good," she whispered, "because I intend to give you something freely." She stepped closer. "I love you too." The words changed his face completely. Not triumph, relief, wonder. He did not touch her yet. "Then I have one question left." Lucy's smile deepened. "You have improved at questions." "I have had rigorous instruction." He held her gaze. "Lucy Catesby, will you marry me?" This time there was no patched gown rescue hidden inside the proposal. No midnight urgency. No title offered as an escape. Lucy knew his strength, his flaw, his apology, and the work he had done afterward. More importantly, she knew her answer belonged entirely to her. "Yes," she said, "I will." Albert extended his hand only then. Lucy placed hers in it. His fingers closed gently around hers, and after her acceptance, he lifted her hand and pressed a quiet kiss to her fingers. Lucy looked at him through tears she no longer cared to hide. Outside the open doors, no one applauded. No one needed to. The truth had been spoken publicly. The choice that followed belonged only to them. 6 weeks after Lucy accepted Albert's second proposal, the banns had been read for the 3rd Sunday, and no one in London could pretend the marriage was an impulse born of one humiliating evening. Albert courted her with a discipline that would once have seemed unnatural to him, and had become, by repetition, a kind of tenderness. He asked before sending a carriage. He asked before adding her name to a dinner list. When his solicitor prepared the marriage settlement, Albert insisted that Lucy's personal effects remain clearly hers, and that an independent allowance be placed beyond the daily control of any household steward, including his own. Then he brought the terms to her aunt's parlour and said, "Read every line. If there's anything you dislike, we'll change it." Lucy read them twice. "Even the clause that prevents you from deciding what becomes of my personal property, especially that one. You do realize I may become intolerably difficult as a duchess. I'm relying on it." The answer made her laugh. and Albert's expression softened in the quiet way she had come to recognize as happiness. He had not stopped being decisive. He had learned that loving her did not require him to become smaller, only to leave room for her to stand at full height beside him. Gwendolen had left London before the season ended, just as the withdrawals of calls and tightened credit made continued appearances increasingly uncomfortable. She sent no apology. Lucy did not ask for one. Distance, when honestly chosen, was better than reconciliation performed for society. Irene remained in London under the supervision of a relation, and withdrew from the remaining marriage market engagements arranged for her. A week before the wedding, Lucy received a letter in Irene's restrained hand. There were no excuses in it. Irene wrote that she understood an apology did not entitle her to closeness, that she would continue repaying part of the dressmaker's debt from her future allowance, and that if Lucy ever wished to know her again, she would be grateful for the chance. Lucy folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk. She did not answer that day. She did not destroy it either. Some doors were not ready to open, but they did not need to be nailed shut. By mid-July, London had thinned enough that their wedding could be precisely what Lucy wanted. The parish church was quiet. In the morning light, the stone cool beneath her feet. The congregation limited to family, a few trusted friends, the Dowager Duchess and Lucy's aunt. There was no spectacle to answer the spectacle of the ball. Lucy wore a simple wedding gown chosen with her aunt from a different dressmaker, paid for from funds placed at her own disposal. The garnet brooch rested at her throat. Albert waited near the altar in dark formal clothes, composed until Lucy began walking toward him. Then the composure changed. His eyes met hers, and all the authority that made men step aside in corridors seemed to vanish beneath something far more vulnerable. When she reached him, he did not take her hand until the service required it. Lucy noticed. She thought she might always notice. Their vows were spoken clearly. Nothing dramatic interrupted them. No enemy arrived. No revelation remained hidden. When the clergyman named them husband and wife, Lucy felt no sensation of being transferred from one household into another. She felt the opposite. She had chosen. Albert had chosen. The law now recognized what neither of them had been willing to counterfeit before trust existed. Outside the church, he offered his arm. "May I escort the Duchess of Erlingham to her carriage?" Lucy looked at him with mock gravity. "That depends. Is the Duke of Erlingham capable of taking instructions from his wife?" "I've had 6 weeks of advanced training. Then you may try." Their laughter followed them down the steps. They left London later that morning for Brighton, travelling south by private carriage with changes of horses along the road. The journey consumed most of the day. Lucy watched the city give way to fields and villages, then longer stretches of road under the high summer sky. Albert did not fill the hours with plans for Tyndale Court or explanations of what would be expected of her as Duchess. When practical matters arose, he framed them as questions. Which household visits would she prefer to postpone? Which charitable responsibilities interested her? Would she rather spend more time in London that autumn or begin with a quieter period in the country? Lucy answered some. Others she left for later. Albert accepted that too. By the time they reached Brighton, the light had begun to mellow over the town. The sea air entered, even through the partly opened carriage window, carrying salt and a faint freshness unlike London's enclosed summer streets. Their lodgings overlooked a broad stretch of the front, and when Lucy finally entered the private sitting room prepared for them, Fatigue settled over her all at once. Albert removed his gloves and looked at her carefully. "Are you tired?" "Yes. Do you want to rest?" Lucy crossed to the window. Beyond the glass, the sea flashed beneath the late afternoon light. "I'm tired, but I still want to see it." Albert smiled. "Then we'll see it." Lucy changed only enough for the walk. From her traveling case, she chose the moss-green pelisse she had selected herself several weeks earlier, not because anyone had advised that green suited a duchess, but because she liked the color. She fastened her mother's garnet brooch at the throat. When she returned to the sitting room, Albert was waiting near the door. His gaze moved from the pelisse to the brooch, and then to her face. "You chose that one." "I like it." Lucy lifted a brow. "Fortunately, I did not ask permission. Fortunately, I have learned the difference between admiration and authority." He stepped closer, then paused. Lucy tipped her face slightly toward him. Albert understood. He kissed her forehead with quiet affection. When he drew back, Lucy touched his sleeve, rose on her toes, and kissed his cheek. His surprised smile was so unguarded that she laughed. "You may recover on the promenade. I'll do my best." They went out together as the afternoon softened toward evening. Brighton moved around them, with carriages, visitors, servants, and families taking the air. But the wide presence of the sea made even fashionable society seem smaller. Lucy breathed more deeply. She had expected marriage to feel like an arrival. Instead, it felt like space opening. They walked without hurry until the promenade divided around a landscaped section overlooking the water. One path continued among the fashionable walkers. The other bent nearer the sea. Albert stopped. Once, he might have chosen the quieter route because he thought she needed peace. Once, he might have chosen the busier one because he thought public appearance would strengthen her new position. Now, he simply looked at her. Which way? Lucy turned toward the open water. The wind moved lightly against the moss-green cloth at her shoulders. At her throat, the garnet caught the late afternoon light and burned for an instant like a small remembered flame. She smiled. Toward the sea. Albert offered his hand. Nothing in the gesture assumed that she would take it. Lucy placed her hand in his because she wanted to. His fingers closed around hers, warm and familiar. Side by side, they turned toward the water. The story of Lucy Catesby had begun with someone deciding what she should wear and what the world was permitted to see. It ended, not with a duke choosing for her, but with the man she loved, asking which way she wished to go, and with Lucy answering for herself.